Let's begin.
Hey there, scary story fanatics. Welcome back to the big night, night 13 of this 13-day terror train. Tonight, I have something very special lined up for you. So if you're up for it, sit back, relax, and get ready to tread down Hell's Boulevard. In the mid-1970s, work began on an extravagant hotel getaway in the woodland region of northwest Massachusetts. The land was cleared and the terrain leveled, preparing for the construction of the foundation, framing, and all that goes into the creation of such a monolithic structure. Reports fluctuated about what occurred on that day. Most official records seem to leave out what many witnesses have been said to describe. It had been nearly a year since the land had been cleared, and work had begun. The building that towered up on that old hill rose 4 stories skyward, and is at least 6 times the length of its height. The rectangular orbits of window frames and glass slit eye level with the distant highway, with a large chasm of a valley that stretches between the two, a veritable sea of trees and forest life that laps the shore of each woodland hill in a silent and unmoving tide. The exterior walls that hugged the framed windows and various entranceways consisted of brick, and on that day, in late October, a few weeks from its grand opening, the outside of the building, including the roof, doorways, and the like, were complete. Those who tread those halls today will tell you the place looks relatively operational and finished, only the decay of age and abandonment taking away from this element. Most of the finished work had been completed inside and out. Only some remaining wallpaper, countertops, and other such last-minute construction tasks remained. In order to save money, companies were rushing to complete the project before the total onset of the cold weather, negating the need for paying for heat and saving costs. Crews were beefed out in capacity and busy, working both first and second shifts so as to finish by the deadline. There had been apprehension and rumors floating around the job site about the basement level. Strange happenings reported to have been occurring within. Nothing drastic had ever happened, nothing to trigger every worker on site to pause. Not until one day in October, when a stop order went into effect, never to be lifted, and halting progress on the hotel indefinitely. Masons had been complaining of whispers in the dark, coming from the unlit expanse of the sublevel's main hall. Carpenters frequently reported tools missing, never to be found, no culprit caught. When interviewed after released from employment, almost everyone who had worked on the site spoke of a dreadful, ominous presence and demonic howls in the darkness. The oddest and most unsettling accounts came from the building's planners themselves. Officials were curious. Why was there so much work being done on a portion of the structure that should have been completed months ago? To their surprise, superiors and carpenter foremen in charge of layout reported complications with the dimensions of the basement corridor. After initial completion, the design of the adjoining rooms, all but furnished and carpeted, was somehow much too long. One of the men brought it to their attention that somehow there were too many rooms. It should have been 13 rooms on either side, but now there were 14. No one had a plausible explanation as to why there were 2 extra rooms, and the hall being too long for what had been outlined in the blueprints to be. Logically, the lead supervisor and foreman were dismissed and replacements were hired, each tasked with redesigning the sublevel to the building's specifications. Soon afterward, the upper levels were almost complete as well. The hall and rooms were being configured, assuring the measurements and design adhered to blueprint specs. More and more workmen began reporting terrible sounds, screams, and pleads for help in the depths below the ground level. This had apparently been attributed to rumors that had begun to spread regarding the shifty layout of the sublevel, and therefore was relatively ignored by supervisors and foremen. Despite those in lead positions ensuring nothing was awry, that everyone was just being superstitious or entertaining a mild group hysteria, they had to know in the forefront of their minds that they were outright lying. The basement floor had been redone 3 more times. Each time, the dimensions were off from what they should have been. Either there were too many rooms, or the corridor seemed to stretch past what it should have been in accordance with the laws of physics. And the longer it took to overhaul the place, the more it seemed to, grow. In the world of business, not much can stop a deadline, and this ambitious project was no exception. The date had been set for the building and fire inspection, so as to receive approval for moving forward and finishing the project. Now, reporters differ from this point on, but all accounts describe the inspector leaving that place in an ambulance, hair as white as newly fallen snow, and aged skin to match. Records show him to have been 35 years old. Soon after that, the place was closed permanently, stop work order in effect until the project had lost momentum for completion. And since then, it has been an object of paranormal speculation for as long as I can remember around here. Kids and local deviant teens tell stories about the day that the supervisor accompanied the inspector into the sublevel so as to point out spots of interest. Some say he never returned. Some say he did and simply claimed the inspector had gone insane. But the fact remained. The project had been shut down, and the entrance to the basement below was bricked off. Now all that's left of that place, and its original story, aside from less than a handful of disjointed and obscure reports, is a monumental shell of a structure that sits alone on that island of swaying grass, rising and peaking above the woodland canopy surrounding it on all sides. The flora below embraced the hill in a woodsy isolation that would no longer allow for easy access, especially by vehicle. This means that whoever would venture to that forgotten and abandoned location would have to do so under the power of their own 2 feet. Honestly, I've only been up there once before. It's a lengthy walk over rough terrain, and difficult to make it there and back again in a single afternoon. The fact that the only transportation my friends and I had access to were bikes, coupled with the impositions of childhood, meant that we could only go there in our imaginations by the way of ghost stories told around campfires and during sleepovers. When I was 15, one of my closest and slightly older friends, Carson, got his driver's license. His parents ended up going halves on an old car for him to drive, and soon Carson and I were hitting the roads on weekends. His parents were pretty lenient, but mine were kind of, restrictive. Not that they were overbearing, but they had their rules and expected me to abide by them. This included being home before dark, unless spending the night at someone's house. In those instances, they would call once an evening to check in on me. Like I said, Donnie's parents were worse. Donnie was our outgoing friend. He always called him the crazy one. His mom and dad were much more strict than mine, and he was frequently grounded. That never seemed to stop him, though. Hell, half the time he'd be sneaking out, and we wouldn't even know it until Carson would offer to drop him off at his driveway. I was usually gone by then, due to the whole curfew thing. Still, at times, when I would sleep over at Carson's house, I would occasionally be privy to the sight of watching Donnie scamper off into the woods in an attempt to sneak back into his house after dark. It was a bright, sunny afternoon when Donnie suggested we go visit the old site of what had become locally known as Hell's Boulevard, referring to the subterranean level of that abandoned hotel in the hills outside of town. I'll never forget that day. I swear it was one of the worst days of my life. I spent a muggy summer afternoon trudging through foul, stagnant swamps, uneven hilly terrain, and thickets of thistles and thorn underbrush, only to arrive at a building with nothing particularly interesting inside. Sure, exploring the vast expanse of an entire hotel was pretty cool, but most areas were either too dangerous or pest-infested to even think about going into. I remember one room that we had opened the door to was practically crawling. There had been so many spiders on each of its walls. Rat and mouse feces littered the floor. And to top it all off, there was no sublevel. At least, not one that we could enter. The stairwell did indeed extend below the first floor, but once descended, we were met with a solid brick wall. Either the entire story was a farce, or the entrance to Hell's Boulevard had been sealed off. Donnie joked about how large the place must be by now, considering the rumor that the corridor grew as time passed. I laughed to myself a bit and considered the redundancy of the comment. I mean, that is how it got its most modern name after all. I felt so incredibly stupid. It would now be dark before I arrived home. I would get into trouble, and it wasn't even worth it. The stories were cool, but I had no desire to visit that place ever again. But I should have known Donnie and Carson would talk me into going up there again eventually. In fact, when we left that day, he had made a promise that the next time he'd be more prepared to deal with the brick wall, whatever that meant. But it certainly insinuated the eventual return trip. But over a year had passed, and this thought was pushed beyond the back burners of my mind. It was late October, about 6 days before Halloween. My girlfriend, Alice, and I had been planning our Halloween together for a little over a month. She was going as Harley Quinn, and I, the Joker. Some would have, and some did, argue that the two of us were a little old for trick-or-treating. But that never stopped me before. Besides, just the thought of Alice in a Harley Quinn outfit drove me insane. So, when she was shipped off to her grandparents while her mom and dad went on some business trip about 2 weeks before Halloween, I was bummed, to say the least. Her grandmother lived almost 3 hours away, and there was no way we'd be spending the night gallivanting the streets in our outfits now. Considering the drive time to get there and back, having Carson drive me wasn't even an option. Frustrated by circumstances and now having essentially no plans for Halloween, I was texting Alice over social media after school. "What are you doing this weekend?" I texted. "Just handing out candy. You?" Alice replied. "Not much. I guess since you're not around, I'll probably hang out with Carson, I responded plainly. Oh, God, what's he got you into now? Alice replied back to me. I guess Donnie wants to visit Hell's Boulevard. Shitty walk, bringing lots of beer, I elaborated, using a colon/ to emote disdain and lack of enthusiasm. I was 16 now, and my parents had extended my curfew past dark. The great thing about Halloween, they expected me to be out most of the night. It was kind of like a free pass, so long as I didn't get myself arrested. Sure, I wasn't too keen on Carson's idea when he texted me about it, but there was no talking him or Donnie out of it, and without them, I would be alone just passing out candy as well. Don't go. I'm serious. You shouldn't mess around with that place. Alice texted me back. She was less of a skeptic than I was, and always warned me about things like reading copies of the Necronomicon or wanting to experiment with a Ouija board. Becca told me she knows a guy who went up there and the police are still looking for him. She texted me again. Becca was Alice's best friend and the school's gossip queen. I didn't remember hearing about any local disappearances. I'll be fine. I'll be careful, I promise, I reassured her, messaging her back. She wasn't fond of the idea, far from accepting it, but she knew, even as she argued with me essentially over the next 6 days, that I would not change my mind. The moon wasn't all the way full, but nearly so, and its glow was only concealed by the occasional wisping cloud that lazily passed in front of it. I was glad that we had made it here before dark, but still, now I dreaded the walk back. Carson and I spent all afternoon waiting on Donnie because he had to watch his little brother until the babysitter arrived home. She was supposed to be at his house by 2 o'clock, which was bad enough, but tardy as all hell, she didn't show up until nearly 3:30. It was a race against time at that point. Donnie insisted that it would be far more fun in the dark anyway, and that the walk wouldn't be that bad. I couldn't tell if he was honestly trying to get me to believe a lie I obviously knew to be false, or get himself to believe it. I'll admit, the beers I had managed to swipe from my old man's downstairs refrigerator, combined with the party favors of weed and vodka that Donnie had brought along, the trip was slightly more pleasant than I envisioned. But at least then, we had a dull gray sky above the canopy to help guide our way through the foul marshlands and thickets of thorny bramble. Now, we'd only have the penetrating glow of a single flashlight, brought along by Carson. Staring up at this place, looming and dreadful, contrasted by the perfect Halloween backdrop, Donnie handed me one of my father's beers from his backpack. Since he was the only one to bring one, Carson and I made him carry just about everything. You guys ready? Carson asked us. Hold on a second, I'm packing a bowl, Donnie responded. It was actually pretty funny how often he responded with that exact comment. Seemed like no matter what we were doing, Donnie had to light up first. He said experiences like this were so much, and I quote, cooler when high. I didn't exactly agree with him, but I didn't exactly turn the bowl away either when he passed it to me. I could go with or without, but if it was being passed to me, I usually partook. Carson agreed to wait and finish our peace pipe, as he called it, before we went in. It'll give me time to finish this beer anyway, Carson reasoned. How many we got left? He inquired. Since Nancy boy over here wussed out and only took 7, we're down to 1 more, not including the one Greg's got in his hand, Donnie said as he popped one of the beers. I cracked my beer as Donnie finished his statement. I gave him a shove, somewhat sparingly so as to not cause him to drop the bowl. I called him a dick, and replied by explaining that he was lucky that I could get away with that many. After I hit the pipe, I handed it to Carson, who asked Donnie for the vodka bottle, giving the bowl back to him in exchange for the high-proof alcohol. I coughed as I let out my hit, watching Donnie struggle to hold his in, while Carson chased a slug of vodka with a gulp after a gulp of his beer. Just the thought of those two flavors coalescing in my mouth made me want to hurl. But I said nothing, wondering if that would be Carson's inevitable fate. Once the bowl was beat and Carson's beer can contained nothing but a small amount of piss and foam, Carson tossed his can as Donnie passed out cigarettes. Yeah, I don't smoke often, but occasionally it seems like the thing to do. This was one of those occasions. Donnie reshuffled the pack onto his back, and the three of us began walking towards the front entrance of this now iconic monument. As soon as we had crossed the threshold, it was as if a wall of absolute darkness fell before us. The flashlight helped to light our immediate path, but the interior was so expansive, the beam had difficulties fully landing on any surface beyond, far beyond its reach, and diminishing the amount of light reflected back at us, making it seem as if the darkness itself was consuming the light. Once we had turned toward the direction of the stairwell, and the peeling walls of the first-floor corridor were closer to us, light met the substrate and confirmed the previous perception just an illusion of optics and an inebriated mind. Our combined footsteps echoed off the surrounding walls and reverberated back to our eardrums, creating a cacophony of clattering footsteps that grew in intensity as more and more reverberations were added to the mix. As we reached our destination, in the stark and nearly vacant hallway, the echoes of our footsteps began to die down, and Donnie opened the door, pulling at the handle. As it creaked open, a cold chill ran up my spine, and as a fist-sized ball of apprehension formed heavily in my stomach, it was because of that of the sound that seemed to come from far beyond the door to the stairwell leading down. It was a shriek, faint and almost unheard, but discernible and riddled with pained intent. But the door had creaked, and our echoing ruckus had created all sorts of sound distortions around us. So when Carson stepped towards the door that Donnie now held open, I stupidly shrugged it off as passing sensationalism and acquiesced to following them. I don't know what you guys are expecting to find down here. There's nothing down there but solid walls. I broadly mentioned to the both of them. Yeah, but this time I'm prepared, Donnie said, sliding the pack off of his back and swinging it around as he descended and reached inside. Before I could ask, he pulled out the object and held it high above his head, and even in the dim flickering light of a moving flashlight's reflection off the wall around us, I still instantly recognized the thing as a small, one-handed, 2-pound sledge. Well, it might take a while, but it sure would be sufficient enough to do the job. Then, Donnie claimed something that made no sense to me at first, no matter how many times the echo of his voice repeated the words over and over in my ears. Dude, looks like I didn't even need this thing, he stated plainly. I suppose I should have known what he meant, but the sight was honestly unexpected. I had been sure, believed in my head that there was nothing down there but solid wall. Donnie shined his light on a large hole in the center of the brick wall at the bottom landing, large enough for us to walk through in an almost upright position. Rubble lay upon the floor, stretching outward toward the stairs, the ground beneath my feet uneven and unstable, causing me to reshift my balance each time a chunk of brick rolled beneath my sneakers. With the combination of alcohol and marijuana, I almost fell over, having to catch myself on the railing beside me, ending at my last step. When I looked into the direction of the gaping chasm in the wall, my astonishment overwhelming, I noted the floor beyond to be, albeit quite dusty with age, free of debris. What the hell? That's fucked up. This was solid last time, I said in bewilderment. Yeah, so what? It's not now. The point is, I was right, Donnie said, directed at me but indirectly at Carson too. The reason fueling Donnie's enthusiasm was the element that frightened me at the most at the moment. The floor, that dusty and flat floor beyond the hole in the wall, solidified a truth that up until that very moment had only been legend and rumor. That floor being there meant there was indeed a space beyond those bricks, a space so large light could not extend to the opposite end of where we now stood. That meant it had been intentionally bricked up, and it also meant that at least part of that old story was true. And there was a sublevel to this place. Who do you think did this? I asked both of them at once, and it was Carson that answered. Probably some kids like us, Carson responded in question form, underscoring his position that I should have already come to that conclusion. I suppose it was a silly question. The most likely answer was that someone similar to us came here with similar intents, making way for us sometime between our last visit and now. And if it wasn't, well, how the hell would they know that? However, although the logic was sound, something didn't sit right. But that feeling went as soon as it came, with no lingering notion to tether to it. In instances like this, you'd expect every fiber of your being to light up with warning, like some sort of clairvoyant mechanism designed to keep us from untimely fates or impending doom. There is no such physical or mental function, and I found myself just as curious as apprehensive about entering the space beyond. This is fucking awesome, Donnie stated with glee, stepping past Carson and through the hole. Carson quickly followed behind him, lighting the way for them both. Considering that he had the only light, I was forced to keep up and forego any lingering hesitation. Dark wouldn't even begin to describe this place. The walls on either side of us were smooth. They were a cement gray and felt as such, but were absolutely smooth. Not a single blemish. The floor beneath us was also rigid and unyielding, and beside the thick layer of accumulated dust also seemed to be made of cement. It wasn't long before I noticed something. There had been rumors that this place existed, and indeed it did, but those stories included rooms on either side, which made sense. After all, why have a long hallway this long with no doors or rooms on either side? Sure, in some places, a design like this might make sense, but not a hotel sublevel. Without mentioning this point of notable interest, I turned to look behind me and gained sight of the hole in the bricks through which we had entered. I didn't have a snowball's chance in hell. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face, never mind the end of the hall. It was then that I turned and mentioned the lack of doors to both Donnie and Carson, and revealed that they were thinking the same thing. As each of them offered their own ideas and perspectives, I noticed a change, one of many to come. It was barely noticeable, plausibly undetectable at first, but the more we walked, the warmer and stuffier the air became. It wasn't unbearable by any means, but still noted by my hidden thoughts. Coincidentally, Carson's and Donnie's laughter and jokes seemed to dwindle off, leaving the three of us in near silence for a while. No one said it, but I'm sure we were all thinking the same thing. How long is this hallway? We had been walking it for what must have been almost 10 minutes, and still the flashlight beam just disappeared into seemingly never-ending darkness before us. Despite the piss-poor lighting and the clouds of now kicked-up dust, I noticed it before the words had even escaped Carson's mouth. "Dude, look!" Carson insisted. The walls were so smooth and flat that the slight jutting of a door jamb at the edge of the flashlight's limitations instantly revealed its presence. And just as easily noticed was the door on the wall opposite. I think Donnie said that we should try them, but he didn't have to tell us. All three of us tried each handle to affirm what the first had divulged. Locked. Donnie even tried kicking one down. No use. "Dude, come on. Let's go back. There's nothing down here," I reasoned with him. Donnie gave the door another couple of kicks in a final attempt to bust through. That's when I heard Carson's words that I don't think he intended for anyone's ears. Donnie hadn't heard them, but I did. "What the hell is that?" Carson murmured. I turned in the direction of his now pointed light, but didn't need the light to see what he aimed at. The banging on the door behind me ceased, underscoring that Donnie had stopped his actions and was now taking in the sight as well. It was a light. A red light. So very, very faint, but emanating from what appeared to be at the end of the hall, or at least a distance away. "Dude, there's no power down here," Donnie said behind me, pointing out that a light of any kind down here was unnatural and shouldn't be. "Dude, can we please go back? I don't like this," I pleaded with Carson, but I knew Donnie wanted to check it out as well. No such luck. Carson began walking, the only light in his clutches. I tried to convince Donnie to help me convince Carson, but it was no use. I'm not that scared of the dark, and I'm not very claustrophobic, but we'd been walking for a while, traveled a distance into the bowels of this place, and my only two options were to either head back myself with no way of lighting my path in hopes of absconding, or follow my friends further into the unknown. I chose the latter. Of course, it seemed at first as though the light was only 100 yards or so away, but the more we walked, the more it stayed the same, lingering outside some boundary that kept getting pushed back the more we progressed. My legs were honestly getting tired, and I began getting my hopes up that Donnie's and Carson's were getting to be the same, hopefully prompting them into deciding to turn back. That's when the screaming started. It was so faint, only the mildest of echoes. That last reverberation signified its presence. We all must have heard it at the same time, because we all stopped. Donnie went to say something, but Carson told him to shut up before he could finish. There was another, and another, now coming in pairs, and then in groups. More and more voices detectable in what seemed like a symphony of orchestrated agony as the sounds grew louder. "All right, I'm with Greg. Let's get the fuck out of here," Carson said to Donnie, without turning his head. Donnie simply nodded, I think temporarily forgetting the fact that Carson couldn't see nods with his back turned. I felt beads of sweat form on my brow, and at first I thought it due to stress of fear, but now that my attention was focused upon it, I noticed it again. It was warm, much warmer than when we had entered, and the air was thick and stale. At first I thought it was the dust, but it was more than that. Like an age-old atmosphere that had sat still in an undisturbed chamber for a millennia, and now I was inhaling it. The screaming became louder, the glow of red getting either stronger or closer. Carson took off running back towards where we had come from. Neither Donnie or I said a word, only scrambling after him in a desperate attempt to keep up. The reverberant sounds of misery getting louder, nipping at our heels and driving us forward. Run! Carson screamed ahead of us, the light flailing in the dark as the flashlight tumbled to the ground, then going out. Carson had fallen, screaming that his ankle was broken. Donnie and I rushed towards Carson. I stopped short of where he lay and tried to get him to his feet. The light had grown so strong, everything had begun to glow a dim shade of red. Donnie frantically searched for the dropped flashlight, only to discover the lens and bulb had smashed upon impact with the hard floor. I can't, man. I broke it bad. It's broken, Carson screamed as I tugged at him, insisting that he get up. Donnie rushed to his side as well at this point, standing to my left. I looked over towards him, but the backdrop behind him held my focus with a steel-like grip. A door. One of the only pairs of doors that we had come by. We had walked for a while past this point, but had made it back in only a moment of running. Surrounding it now were scratched, gouged walls, blotchy and black spots that appeared to be large burn marks. Donnie bent down to pull up Carson to his feet, and that's when the door behind him opened. All three of us, the only thing we had time to do was turn and look. An instant later, a blackened hand with 4 digits, each tipped with a long, black, jagged nail, gripped Donnie by the ankle. Donnie screamed out as whatever held him pulled him back so hard that Donnie was tossed to the floor chest first, as he was yanked backwards. Carson yelled out to him as he outstretched his hand, catching Donnie's as he collided with the floor. As if the both of them together weighed nothing more than a blanket, Donnie and Carson were yanked so swiftly through the open door that I almost hadn't even noticed them move. As if they were there 1 second and literally gone the next. I rushed the door to follow them, and it slammed in my face. My God, I only caught a sight of what was beyond that door, and it was as grotesque as it was impossible. The odor alone was beyond anything a living human can describe. It was the stench of a countless number of what looked like billions of bodies, all scorched, mutilated, and leaking fluids of all kinds across a landscape that stretched on for an eternity. I saw boiling lakes of blood, rivers of flowing, tormented souls that I somehow knew had been there for many lifetimes. I saw colossal shadow things in the distant horizon that must have been so monumental that the mere sight of one, of many, made me feel so very small and insignificant. And their amorphous shapes that distorted and moved identified them as either the leviathans of old or something just as sinisterly frightful. I saw despair, as if it was a tangible thing that could be touched instead of experienced. And in there, it was. To explain it is a mockery of our universe, for in no logical way can I describe what utter despair, suffering, and hopelessness feels like, tastes like. It's permeating like water. Black skeleton hands rose from the blackened floor or dirt inside, sprouting like reeds of grass and reaching outward in frantic desperation. I caught no sight of either of my friends before the door closed. The instant it did, the red glow around me seemed to switch off like someone had cut it instantly at its source. But the screaming remained. I covered my ears, but it didn't matter. It seemed to cut through my hands without sensation and spitefully reach my eardrums anyway. I was surrounded by it. It came from everywhere. I couldn't see anything, and I was lost in an ocean of blackness and audible pain. I turned and looked around too much. I panicked. I took off running down the hallway, but I had no direction to which way was out anymore. I felt so hopeless, ready to be squashed like a bug at any moment. I kept asking myself the same question over and over again. Oh, why did I not listen to Alice? I don't know how long I ran. It felt like hours. Eventually the screaming stopped, leaving me alone in silent blackness, as thick as mud and as dark as ink. I honestly thought it would be better if the screaming stopped, but being left in a sensory deprivation environment allowed my mind to replay those images and sounds over and over again without obstruction. It was quite possibly just as terrifying as being tormented by a chorus of deafening cries for help and shrieks of agony. Once I had walked for so long and figured that I must have gone the wrong way, I hesitantly turned back. I dreaded having to pass by those doors again. I took solace in the fact that it was so dark. I likely wouldn't even notice them as I walked by, pushing the thought of one of them opening, something grabbing me and pulling me inside, out of my mind as best I could. Again, I don't know how far I had walked, but when I began to feel dehydrated and my legs turned to rubber, I realized that I'd more than doubled my time walking in this direction than in the other. No matter which way I went, there seemed to be no end, no way out. My mind reeled at the thought, my eyes desperately focused for any kind of landmark. Maybe it was fatigue or mental strain, but my thoughts became foggy, and I lost count of how many times I had changed directions. I had to stop and take a piss 6 times. I had to be searching for at least a day. All hope was lost. And then I slipped on something that rolled beneath my foot, causing me to stumble and hit my head. I pulled my hand up to rub off the top of my head and felt the brush of something familiar, rectangular and gritty like sand. It was a brick. I had hit my head on the top of the brick opening through which we had entered. My heart pounded, pulsing with anxiety and adrenaline. I clambered through the entranceway with a newfound burst of energy and scrambled for the stairs. A faint, soft light now crept into the stairwell above me, lending me the first sight of illumination in what seemed like forever. I took one glance back at that bricked-up wall that had been broken through, the pieces of brick now scattered inward into the depths, creating the rubble on which I had slipped. Not wasting another second, I ran up the stairs towards freedom, completely failing to take note that it now looked like someone had busted through the wall from the other direction. But it's not like I would ever get a chance to ponder it anyway. It's not like anyone will ever find out that without reason, the basement level of that old hotel is a portal to someplace else. Someplace far more malevolent than anything imagined by fictional masters of terror or true accounts of atrocities. When I ran from the stairwell on the first floor and turned the corner, I almost came to a skidding stop before falling to my knees. I covered my mouth to stifle the scream that only came out as a desperate squeak. I was in the hotel, but now aglow with a brilliant, dark red. The floor brown with feces and writhing maggots. The walls covered in thick, sticky, oozing blood. Flaps of filleted skin hung from the walls like tapestries, and the air's aroma seemed to burn the inside of my nostrils like fire each time that I inhaled. I don't belong here. I may not be perfect by any means, but we didn't have any malintent. I don't deserve an eternity of despair and woe. But I know now that I will never escape, that I will never leave what is now the horror of my existence. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, and hell's Boulevard is a one-way street.
Well, they say hell might be just around the corner, but that depends on how far down that road you're willing to walk. And if you're willing to walk back here again tomorrow, we're back to our regular scheduled programming. But before we get there, I want to make sure to thank you for showing up for this epic marathon of mayhem, and hope you truly have a happy Halloween.
Social media can be very unpredictable, especially regarding horror content. If this content gets removed, all new content will be simultaneously presented on various websites provided in the description to this video. Make sure to follow me in other digital spaces so that you never miss out on the terror. Also, if you like this video, make sure to leave a comment and hit the like button. It helps the channel a lot. If you're new to the channel and you enjoy what's here, consider hitting that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you never miss an upload. Writing is a dream of mine, and it's all of you that make that dream come true.